When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be continuing our reread. So getting into it, we have Jon 3. Now, Jon 3, this is my favorite Jon chapter so far that we've gotten. It really dives into Jon as a character and a person right now. And I love that this chapter is expanding not only the world, but also Jon as a character. And this chapter is going to pick up with Jon getting to the wall. So unlike in the show there's this scene where it's them getting to the wall and looking at the wall. We don't really get that. We kind of get a flashback of Jon looking or seeing the wall for the first time. But this chapter is like Jon's been at the wall for a couple weeks. He's been training and he's kind of figured out what the watch is. And he's kind of really sulking about it. A lot of this chapter is about him thinking he knows everything and being very arrogant and sulky. And he's going to get taught a lesson. He's going to get taught multiple good lessons in this chapter. And yeah, so let's get into it. And this chapter, I think also, before we really get into it, is a reason that a lot of people, like say Alliser Thorne, don't like Jon because of the way he acts in these first couple of weeks. So let's get into it. We're going to start on page 176. So page 176 opens with Jon at the yard training with some of the other recruits. Notably, at this point, he's going against Gren. Now, we see the clear skill difference, especially with all of these people that have been training. And Jon, as we're going to find out later on in this chapter, is pretty much beating up on people that have never held a sword, probably in their entire lives. All these people are probably too poor to even have owned an actual legit castle-forged sword. And eventually, Jon just beats him. He gives him a couple blows. He hits him really hard on the wrist. And Thorne eventually ends it. And we see that Jon is not well liked, with Gren saying that the bastard broke his wrist. And we're going to see this more with other people, where it's like, Jon doesn't really have any friends here. He's very much alone. And we're going to see that when training session departs, there's nobody with Jon. And Thorne then kind of responds to Gren that you're lucky that you just got a broken wrist, or it's probably not even broken. It's probably more just like it's bruised. In a real fight, you would be a dead man multiple times, Gren. And we note, again, that Thorne hates how the Night's Watch has so few recruits with really any fighting ability. Think about it like this. Alliser Thorne is this knight, someone with, fighting skill. He's been around people like that pretty much his entire life until coming to the Night's Watch. And seeing how incompetent these people are, it only goes to show that Alliser hates the position he's in, that he has to be at the Watch, and that, because he picked the wrong side, he's now ending up here when he was someone that probably thought he deserved much more in life. That's kind of something that I get from Alliser Thorne. So let's move on, and we'll get on to page 177. So moving into page 177, Jon then kind of takes a moment. He's savoring his victory over Gren. And again, I want to note that this is a lot of Jon's youth, right? Jon is very happy to have beaten Gren, and Jon doesn't really understand what the skill difference is. It's kind of like if, let's say, you're playing video games. This is maybe a good representation. It's like you're beating up on, say, your dad who's never played Call of Duty, for instance, and you're just beating up someone that's never played it. It's not really satisfying because there wasn't really any competition there to begin with. And it kind of shows Jon's youth in that aspect of it. Now we learn that Thorne has started calling Jon Snow Lord Snow and remarks on Jon resting after the tilt. Now, I want to take this from Thorne's perspective because we give Thorne a really bad rap, and I think he does deserve it to a good amount. He's not the best teacher. He insults people a lot. He doesn't really seem to grasp how to actually teach people things. But with the idea of Lord Snow, think about how Jon has been holding himself. When we're going to dive in this chapter, especially with Don Illinois, Jon has really been arrogant. He's someone that believes he's better than all of these other people. He acts the role of a lordling. So this Lord Snow remark is very understandable from someone like Thorne. It's very obviously why it spreads to so many people. And Thorn, again, for everything we hate about Thorn, tells Jon, you didn't win. Gren lost. And that's kind of the truth, because it's like Jon should be beating all these people. It's more that Gren needs to improve. Gren is the one losing. There's more impact on that because Gren will die if he doesn't get better. Now we know that Jon is still not taking Tyrion's advice because he's annoyed that people are calling him Lord Snow, making fun of him. He just doesn't grasp the idea of how shit people's lives are that are here compared to himself. Where yes, Jon was put in a very unfortunate circumstance where he ends up at the wall. But think about all these other people, some of these people that, you know, stole because they probably couldn't afford any food. They were starving, this or that. And yes, a lot of people here are, you know, not so innocent like rapers. But again, Jon doesn't really put that into his perspective. Like, think about Jon's early life. He lived in a castle. He lived pretty well outside of, you know, people like Catelyn and Sansa. So again, I think that's a big thing. And the idea is that is going to be hammered into Jon throughout this entire chapter. And what's kind of foreshadowed in his first meeting with Tyrion, stop letting people calling you names dictate what you're going to do, dictate your attitude. Who cares what people are calling you? That's a great sentiment for life. Who cares if people say you're a nerd or who say you're this or that? It doesn't really matter, right? It should matter what you think of yourself. Now, again, Jon at this point is also noting that he has defeated at everyone Thorn has sent against him, but that hasn't really gained any favor, right? In a normal situation, Jon is kind of taking this approach from, okay, well, if I'm beating out all of the competition, I should be getting probably special favor, or he would be pretty nice to me. It's not the case, and I think it's because of the way Jon holds himself. I think if he had gone about this differently, then maybe Thorn wouldn't see him as badly. I still don't think Thorn would like him, because again, he's this summer kid coming in that's like a lordling. But if Jon wasn't so arrogant, if Jon wasn't so above everyone, then maybe this would be a bit different, but who knows? Now, another thing I think we have to look at with why Thorn would not like someone like Jon is think about Jon being this bastard of Ned Stark. Thorn fought for the Targaryens, so Ned was going against Thorn's, I guess, cause that he was serving. So it's kind of that direct competition there as well. And Jon, as all of the recruits are dismissed to go to the armory and put their stuff away, we see how Jon despises his fellow brothers. It's not something like he doesn't really get along with them. He actively does not like them. He despises them. They're not like any of the people that he grew up with in his life. And again, it's a very different circumstance. One of the big key things with Jon is going to be learning how to deal with people different from himself and how he accepts those people. That's one of the great beauties of Jon's storyline. This is going to be kind of the first test there. And as everybody else is like walking back, Jon is walking alone. He's away from the rest of the crowd. Again, showing you that he has no friends. He is not someone well liked. And that gets us into page 178. So page 178, Jon kind of notes how cold it is here. And I want to put this into preference of how cold it actually is. Yes, Jon was living at Winterfell, and Winterfell as a castle is inherently warm. There's like a really interesting quote we're going to get in the next like couple lines that will explain this. But Jon is still like going hunting in, you know, the Wolfwood. He's doing these other things that he knows it's cold in the north, but going to the wall, it's even colder. That really shows you the dynamic and change of how cold it gets as you go further north. So when you have people like the wildlings that are like, you don't know cold, and this is the true north, that's kind of where that sentiment kind of comes from, I feel like. Now, you also get a very interesting line like I talked about as we were getting into this page. I want to read this line, and it's talking about the warm halls of Winterfell. The hot waters ran through the walls like blood through a man's body. It's a very interesting description where we see this idea of people like Bloodraven or aspects of that. It's a very interesting quote, and I thought that was a little nice quote I wanted to share with you guys as we go through this chapter. Now, we see how Jon feels abandoned. Again, we got some of this in the last Tyrion chapter, where Tyrion was kind of telling you, you know, this isn't a great place. And nobody told him that. That's the part that Jon hates, is that Jon was not told by Benjen, by Ned, by anyone of what the Wall was actually like outside of Tyrion. So how does Jon rationalize this? Well, he goes, okay, Ned surely knew this, but he didn't say anything. He let me go here, wasting away my life, and didn't say anything. And I think that's one of the worst things. And I think as we, look at Benjen is this person that, yes, he did try to, kind of dissuade Jon from the Wall, but he didn't do a really good job. Like we talked about with Jon 1, Jon was very drunk when he was saying he wanted to go to the Wall. And he was very emotional as well. And Benjen didn't really do anything to help Jon. And now all of a sudden, Jon has come on this journey to take the watch, the Night's Watch. He's taken the vow, and Benjen isn't really present in Jon's life at all. I mean, Jon notes that he hasn't really talked to Benjen since they got here. It's this idea that Benjen has kind of turned into kind of like this aspect of the Lord, where Bran always notes that Robb becomes Lord Robb. Kind of what we see with Benjen. And as this goes on, I think Jon is coming to this point where he really feels like he was lied to and manipulated, which he was. The Wall was talked up as being this very honorable place and all of these things, and Jon himself, the only reason he's here is because he suggested that he wanted to go here while he was drunk. And maybe he did on the inside want to go here, but it's that drunkenness that made him do it. And I can't help but think it's like nobody explained the situation to Jon. And I completely understand why Jon feels angry and feels this way, but he takes it out in the wrong ways. And again, on Jon and Benjen's last encounter, a lot of it is Benjen belittling Jon, which, again, I can see why he is, right? Because Jon wants all these things that he hasn't earned yet, right? He's only been here a couple of weeks. He already wants to be a ranger, going with Benjen North. All of these things, he thinks he's going to get special treatment because he's a better swordsman. Because he is, a Stark, more or less. And Benjen belittles him and saying that he's a boy and that he's a summer child and all these things. They're correct. But Benjen doesn't really help Jon, who is this confused person that is obviously not going about the watch the right way. He has to go to people like Tyrion and Donal Noy instead of his family. I think that's a very interesting idea, and Benjen is this character that I don't know what to think of him early on in this story. And again, I want to just say, there's this complete and utter shift from Benjen at Winterfell, who was kind of playing around with Jon, being kind of friendly, to Benjen at the Wall, who seems like a complete and utter ass to Jon. So again, I think that's a very interesting point. And let's move on to page 179. So into page 179 is that this is kind of the idea of what the show missed. And again, it's hard to do this because how would you do something where you're looking inside of Jon's mind? Would you have some extra dialogue saying that Jon, said this? But Jon thinks that, or Jon pictures that Benjen is dead. Because again, Benjen is going north of the Wall, and Benjen kind of leaves Jon on a very sour note. And Jon pictures that Benjen is dead in the snow with his blood all over. A very dark thought coming from Jon. And again, it instantly makes Jon feel sick. But again, keep in mind how Jon feels. Jon just feels completely abandoned and alone. And the only person that, is supposed to be there for him, that is his family, is leaving him and not really being nice to him or even giving him good advice. I mean, there's some good advice in what Benjen is saying, but he says it in the wrong way. That's the problem. Because a lot of times people can give good advice, but you say it in the wrong way, so it doesn't come out right to that person. They're not able to accept that advice well. And again, at this point, Jon notes that the gods are cruel, and he couldn't really bring himself to pray to any of the old or the new gods because of how he feels at this point. And Jon starts to reminisce and miss his home. Again, Jon's only been gone for, a couple of weeks, but he already misses his brother and his sister, even Sansa. And we specifically get the note that Sansa only ever called him half-brother. Again, shows that Sansa never really was as close to Jon as the others. And at this point, Jon is interrupted by Gren, who says, "You broke my wrist, bastard." And that gets us into page 180. Now, page 180 is mainly about this encounter that I kind of put on screen. It goes a bit differently in the show than it does the book. In the show, they kind of gave this whole thing to Donald Noy. In the show, they gave it to Tyrion. In the book, it's more Donald Noy. I understand why they did it in the show, but yeah. So, we continue on page 180, and we see how arrogant Jon is. And Jon notes that all of these men are bigger than him. Like, Jon is, yes, skilled with a sword, but these guys are all bigger than him. He can't take them in a fist fight, is basically what he's thinking. But either way, he picks a fight with him. He threatens to break Gren's other wrist. So, Jon breaking Gren's wrist, he doesn't, say, sorry, maybe I hit you too hard or anything like that, or just disregard the comment. He actively threatens to break Gren's other wrist. And Jon then tries to reach for the sword, but instantly his arm is put behind his back by one of the men. And we see the insight of the men as Toad says Jon makes them look bad. And that's the whole idea, is that Jon is running laps around these people. He's making these people look terrible. That's the whole point. These people are feeling very desperate, like they're going to die. And there's a really amazing quote that we get from Donald Noy, is that Jon knows that, yes, he can beat these men. But for the recruits, what is it instilling in them? It's instilling them that they're going to die here. They can't fight. They can't fight back. They're not good enough. And they're not being taught how to fight by Alistair Thorne, really. So that's what's making them desperate. And it's what's driving them to this point of, Jon, you got to back off, and trying to beat him up, basically. And Jon says that they looked bad before he met them. Again, antagonizing people that have just more power than you right now in this situation. Again, all four of them are bigger than Jon. And Toad goes for the throat. He begins to question who Jon's mother was, calling her a whore. And again, that's really the trigger for pretty much most men in the world of don't insult their mother, and that just sets Jon out. Jon somehow gets free of the hold and starts to beat up Toad when they are interrupted by Donald Noy telling them to stop. Noy tells Jon to stay, and they discuss how the Watch needs every man, which is true enough, and killing Toad won't do anything. So, again, Noy sends the others away, and he wants to talk to Jon one-on-one, and this is where we're going to get this entire conversation that we see in the show, where Tyrion's basically saying, you got to look at what's going on here, Jon. Like, you're being an arrogant asshole. And that's going to get us into page 181. And Jon is going to talk about here that, hey, they called my mother a whore, which, again, it kind of isn't the point. Jon had already picked a fight with these people before that happened. But even Noy, I mean, if you look at it from the outside looking in, that's probably who Jon's mother was. Just an outsider's point of view, doesn't know a lot about the situation or would have that information. That's a logical conclusion, and Noy kind of notes that. And I think the biggest point here is that, what does it matter? Like, words being said won't make it real or anything like that. And Jon kind of lashes out, saying he doesn't care about any of the people here, Noy, Benjen, anyone, or the Wall. And it again shows how Jon's kind of feeling backed into a corner. And Jon kind of notes that Ned never talked about his mother, but that he sometimes dreamed of her being highborn and beautiful. So again, this idea of foreshadowing that this could be Ashara or Lyanna, whichever. Noy then also explains how all of these men have really had harder lives than Jon. And I talked about this a little bit earlier on, that, again, Jon, you lived in a castle your entire life. Like, you grew up pretty well, where a lot of these people didn't. A lot of these people grew up hungry, poor, not being able to afford any of the pleasantries that Jon had. And Jon doesn't care. And Noy just says, yes, the Wall is a hard and cold life. that if Jon is not careful, it will be a short life when someone slits his throat, which is completely true, right? Jon is making all of these people look bad. He's continuously antagonizing these people. Eventually, one of them is going to just kill him. And that's the truth. So that'll get us into page 182. And 182 begins that Jon notes that Noi talking to him about life. Noi got to live out a decent life where Jon hasn't. Jon is very young. He's 15. He hasn't experienced really much of life at all, whereas Noi experienced a lot of the world. And Noi only came here after losing his arm in a battle at Storm's End. His life was all but over already because he was a cripple. Again, shows how cripples are viewed in this world. And Jon, that's just a horrible way of looking out. Like, Noi did not have to go to the wall. Noi could have lived out the rest of his life and just been in peace, but he chose to come here instead. We also learned that Noi presumably crafted Robert's Warhammer. And Jon then states something that, again, is the complete arrogance of this point. Jon says that they hate me because I am better than them. Noi responds with the exact wisdom that Jon needs in this moment. No, you act like you are better than everyone. And that you, Jon, are a bully. And that's the truth. That's the truth. Jon is not a better person than these other people. Some of them, maybe because they're rapers, whatever. But Jon acts like that. He's that quintessential person you know in your life that goes around basically acting like they're better than you when they aren't. And Jon is shocked to hear the words that he's a bully. That's unjust. He's not that. And Jon says that there are four of them that came at him. Again, Jon's not hearing what Noi is saying. To which Noi says, you have been humiliating them for weeks. That training isn't what it should be with a good sword. You would kill them, you know it, and so do they. Exactly the point I made earlier that, again, these people have been backed into a corner. They're afraid, they're scared, and Jon is making it worse to where that's fear and being scared is turning to anger. Now, again, Jon is kind of questioning this, and we learn here because Jon does feel proud beating up the other recruits. But Noi questions him on this. And Jon says they are older and bigger. To which Noi notes, like, you had a master of arms that taught you how to fight and beat people that are bigger than you. They didn't have that. And that gets into page 183. And Noi again says that, you were trained. None of these people have even held a sword before. They didn't have the money to have a sword. Again, how does that make you feel, Lord Snow? And this again sets off Jon again hearing this name. And he tells him to not call him that. But Jon starts to feel ashamed. He's kind of starting to register what Noi's saying. And Noi gives him one last piece of advice. He says, best start thinking or sleep with a dagger at night. Again, showing that if he keeps doing his ways, someone will try to kill him. At this point, Jon then leaves the armory, but recounts first seeing the wall, how immense and old it was. Tyrion, funny enough, notes that it's probably one of the most useless things in the world, because what is it separating? He asked the question of, we build a wall, and now everybody starts questioning what's on the other side. Again, this is kind of a note to how the wildlings are not so different than the people south of the wall. It's really that the wall is separating the two peoples. And Jon even states that it's kind of like the end of the world here. And for most people, this is the end of the world. The wall is where the world ends. There's nothing north of that. Which again shows how the White Walkers are able to stay hidden for so long. And Jon, when he finally saw Castle Black, noted that it wasn't really a stronghold. It was just some buildings with no walls to defend it. Again, I don't, hate the depiction of what the show did with Castle Black, but it's vastly different. Castle Black is more like a lot of buildings, this big place of buildings, but it doesn't have a wall. This isn't a castle. This isn't really a stronghold like Jon notes. It's just a lot of buildings. And then you have the wall, because again, it goes into the themes of the Night's Watch. They care about north of the wall. They don't care about the south, west, the east, because they don't take part in the Seven Kingdoms Wars and stuff like that. So they would never expect to be attacked, is really the idea there. And that gets us into page 184. So page 184 continues, and this is going to go back to the present. So Jon was kind of thinking about in that moment, the first time seeing the wall, and he's going to come back into reality. But Jon feels like he can feel the weight of all that ice from the wall. And he foreshadows that if it was to fall, the world would end as well. Now, is this foreshadowing to the others maybe winning, or just that hell would come for the rest of Westeros if the wall was to fall? Something that's very interesting to think about, if the wall did come down, depending on how it actually came down, whether it was like the ice just shatters, or if it actually did like fall, the actual amount of like ripple and earthquake effects that would actually have would be devastating on like the area around the wall. But at this moment, Tyrion then interrupts him and tells him, it makes you wonder what is beyond. And that again is very interesting, because Tyrion is this character that on the face value of it hasn't really shown much interest in that. But he makes you think, like, if this wall was built so high to keep something out, what could be that dangerous that we needed a wall this tall? And Jon, again, did not see him. And Tyrion notes how not being seen grants a lot of information. Again, a perfect line to put in right after we got done with Varys and Littlefinger in the last chapter of them being introduced, that spies are everywhere. And Tyrion is kind of just playing on that idea because he's so used to that with being at court all the time. And that gets us into page 185. And moving on into page 185, we see that Tyrion notes that what is beyond the wall, and says, what are the Grumpkins and the Snarks? Again, Tyrion is someone that doesn't seem like he takes it seriously what's north of the wall, but then I feel like he does at the same time. It's a weird thing with Tyrion in this early part of the chapters, where he definitely doesn't take them seriously, but he does like wonder, like, what if they were there? And Tyrion again gives the advice to Jon, who cares that they're calling you Lord Snow? Don't let people like see that it harms you, because if it does, they're just going to keep using it more, and they're going to use it against you. Use it as kind of a shield. Again, just perfect wisdom that Jon needs to hear at this point. Jon and Tyrion then proceed to get some food. So they go to the hall, they get some stew, we get some comments about the stew. It doesn't sound very appealing. There's no meat in it. Tyrion's not a big fan of that. And Jon and Tyrion, also while they're heading there, they begin to talk about how the watch is failing. And again, Tyrion is kind of wondering like where Jon sleeps, and it's like Jon's basically like, they really don't care. They have so much empty room, because Castle Black is supposed to hold at a maximum 5,000 men, plus their horses, all of their equipment. And now it's maybe holding a tenth of that number. Also, we see that only 3 of the 19 castles are still manned, being in Shadow Tower, Eastwatch, and Castle Black. Again, it shows how the watch is failing. We saw earlier on that Castle Black doesn't get many recruits with actual sword combat or military combat at all. And this just builds upon the idea that the Night's Watch is failing as a whole. And that gets us into page 186. Also, if you guys wanted to see me do a video on why the Night's Watch fails and why it slowly is getting to this point where there isn't enough people to man it, let me know. But getting into page 186. We again see that we then see Tyrion noting that Benjen has gone ranging, and Jon thinks about how he had wished Benjen dead, again coming back to that idea that that was a dark moment for him, and they said that they're going to look for Waymar Royce. Now, I think this is key, because Tyrion says that a lot of these rangers have been going missing, but they only act when it's a high-born person like Royce, again showing how people of upper class do get that privilege, like Jon has kind of been leaning into before this point. And Tyrion even notes that the Rangers have been going missing and notes that maybe the Grumpkins have been hungry. And then they then enter the hall, and Jon picks a spot away from the others. Again, Jon being very isolated. He's not very friendly with a lot of the people here. And that gets us into page 187. So, page 187, Tyrion then sits down with Jon, and at this moment, Alliser calls Jon Snow. Alliser says that the Lord Commander wants to see him, and Jon asks why has Benjen been found? Because he was like, well, if Jeor Mormont wants me, it's probably because of Benjen. And Thorne does not answer. But again, we see this moment, right, where I had the picture up where Tyrion interrupts them from, attacking Jon. And Tyrion, this is kind of the moment that they took for that, where Tyrion's like, Thorne, I know people in court that could get you killed. Tell him or else. You're frightening Jon. And Thorne says that it's about Bran. Jon then runs to the Lord Commander, literally, he starts walking, and he's just like, nah, full sprint, I need to know. Jon then enters to see Jeor, who is described as an old, bald man, and he tells Jon, you can read, and hands him the letter. And that gets into page 188. Jon begins to cry as he's reading this letter that Bran has been awoken. He doesn't even realize the crippled part. He's just happy that Bran's alive. And he rushes back to Tyrion saying that he's going to live, and he's overjoyed. He's telling everybody, even the guards outside Mormont's room, that Bran is going to live, his brother's going to live. And he even sees Gren, and he goes up to Gren, and apologizes for hurting him and actually offers to teach him how to defend it. It's something that Robb had once done to Jon. Thorne hears this, and then basically he's like, what, are you going to replace me, Jon? And Jon accepts his challenge, saying that he will try. So it's interesting where it's like, again, Jon is just pissing off Thorne. Probably not the best move, even though Alliser probably deserves it. And that gets us into our last page, 189, where it basically says, you have made a grave mistake, Jon. And that is how the chapter ends. This is actually, I think, the longest chapter we've done. I feel like I keep saying that. That's just because the chapters get longer and longer as we go on, I feel like. But this is definitely, I think, a top 5 chapter for me. It's a lot of what's going on with Jon and his psyche at this point, and a lot of interesting questions that are going to build into his character. And this is really, in my opinion, this is really the first Jon chapter. Where a lot of the other chapters have maybe focused on other things while Jon was there, this is the first one that really dives into him as a person. So thank you guys all for watching this video. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Again, sorry for this being uploaded late, a day late. Hope you guys like this week's videos. We're going to be doing kind of a stream topic that I was talking about Monday on Thursday. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about why Tywin didn't remarry. And then it would appear off of the poll, we're going to be doing a reaction to Preston Jacobs' first episode of his killing the dragons type thing with the Maester conspiracy stuff. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. I know some of you have had mixed feelings of me doing reaction content. We're going to see how it goes for a little while. May not, keep doing it. May, just depending on how things go. So, yeah. Thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.